Eisenberg. Jake, thanks for joining us, man.
Yeah, great to be here. Not the phrase that I would have gone with, but
Oh, we have to.
I will accept it. Great to be with you, Jack.
Now, you've been doing this a couple of years down here in Surprise, watching this team day by day, and I know it's early. I know you had just gotten down here, but if there's a shift, a difference you can tell based on the last couple of years, anything stick out to you with this group?
You know, it is a little bit hard to say. It's also very interesting. This is now year 4 for me here, and I've seen 3 very, I think, distinct seasons. My first year in 2023, the energy coming into camp was a whole lot of new. Matt
Yeah.
Cutrero and the entire staff was new. It was JJ's first full season as GM, and so there was a lot of new in the front office too. And I think there was a lot of hope, but also an understanding that that year was probably going to be challenging in terms of wins and losses, and we were going to evaluate what was going to be here to stay and what might not be. And so 2023 was kind of its own little silo. And then 2024, such a massive step forward, and you could feel that brewing a little bit the second half of 2023. You could see the light at the end of that tunnel. For me, 2023 never felt like a 106 loss season, even if that's what it was, the end result was. So 2024, big step forward. And then last year, you come into camp and there's the expectations of we're winning the division, we're going to the playoffs. That's the minimum. And unfortunately, it's a team that fell short for a variety of reasons. You know, the offense struggled in the first half, even though they were way better in the second half. The pitching was really good throughout the season, but that was certainly thanks to a lot of people contributing that weren't necessarily expected to. Noah Cameron, chief among them, but then you had Stephen Kolek and Ryan Bergert into the mix. And, you know, every single one of the Royals members of the opening day rotation spent time on the IL last year, and, you know, with Reagans and Chris Bubich specifically for a good portion, a majority of the season in some ways. So that last year, the expectations were there, but it never quite came together fully. At the end of it, 82-80, still having a winning season, I think that was important emotionally to continue having a winning season and a winning track record. And then you come into this year and you ask what the difference is. I think the difference is that the expectations are still there in the same way as they were last year. Win the division, make the playoffs. But there's also a little bit more of an edge of we know what it's like to get there, and we know what it takes to get there, and we know we fell short of that last year. And there's a little bit of that edge, a little bit of that chip that you can sort of feel just in the first couple of days of being here.
Is it important to hear the words disappointment when it comes to evaluating last year? We just sat down with Matt Strom a couple hours ago, and he'd said one of the first things that stood out to me when I got to this clubhouse was how disappointed this group was in how it went last year, and where on the surface we can say, hey, you know, you feel like you left some stuff on the table, but 82-80 is a heck of a lot better than 56-106. But to have that motivation of, yeah, we're flushing that. That's not what we wanted to have happen. And if that happens again this year, it'll be an even bigger disappointment.
Well, I think that having that disappointment, sure, is important. I think every single guy in every single clubhouse would tell you that if they're not the ones celebrating after the final out, that there's going to be some disappointment. Like, ultimately, you play this game to win the World Series, right? And so if you fall short of that, then that's going to be varying levels of disappointment depending upon where you're coming from and what you're doing. I think for the Royals specifically, yeah, there would be some disappointment. I think massively a lot of disappointment if this year turns out similarly to last year, because I think that 2025 in some ways was a little bit of a, okay, prove it sort of year. Like, you just made the playoffs for the first time in a decade. You know, you won a playoff series for the first time since winning the World Series. Can you do it again? Can you prove that it wasn't a fluke? And I think that last year there might be some naysayers that said, oh, you know what? Yeah, 2024 might have been a little bit of a fluke because they didn't make the playoffs in 2025. And so there's definitely some motivation to go and prove all of those doubters wrong, that this is a Royals team that is going to contend this year. And not only this year, but with the core that's being built, this is a team that is going to be a postseason contender for the foreseeable future and should be.
What has to go right this year? Because we talk about it other than teams like the Dodgers, right, that have so much star power. They're so loaded from top to bottom. For the Royals specifically, what does need to go right? Because last year it was this, you know, if they can get the offense going to pair with that pitching staff, you're going to be just fine. You're going to be able to build a lead in the Central like the Tigers were able to early on. In my opinion, it all kind of comes back to health for me. Because if you have a healthy rotation, now that you have that depth, we saw in 2024, even with a middle-of-the-league offense and even at times slightly below average, that pitching staff could carry them to a wild card spot. And if they can stay healthy and they have that depth, Is that going to be good enough to win this division to make a deep run in October, or do they need other stuff to fall in line as well?
In short, yes. I mean, health is going to be key for not just the Royals, but the 29 other teams too. I do think that the Royals, just in terms of pitching, are probably in a bit better of a position than maybe some others in terms of depth. I mean, you're talking about a full, really good rotation top to bottom as it exists in our minds right now with Cole Reagan, Seth Lugo, Michael Waka, Chris Bubich, and Noah Cameron. And that's not even to mention Stephen Kolek, who's starting the Cactus League opener, and Ryan Bergert, who's ready to go not too long after that. And I think Lewinder Avila could be a really exciting depth piece, either in the bullpen or as a potential depth starter as well. Not to mention, NRIs that have come in, other trades that have been made. I think there's a lot more depth on the pitching side here this year than there was last year. And so if there is an injury along the way, of course, it depends on who and the severity, but I think the Royals are well positioned to kind of make it through that trial in a way that they really struggled to do last year. If not for Noah Cameron, we would not be talking about a team that was above 500 or a team that had a shot at making the postseason entering September. What he did last year was truly extraordinary. And so you asked, what has to go right for the Royals? I think that you're going to need repeat performances from the obvious. You need Bobby Witt Jr. to be your superstar again. You need Maikel Garcia to prove that last year was not a flash in the pan, that he is a top 20, top 15 player all around in all of baseball, which he was last year. You need Vinny Pasquantino to go be your run producer again. 30 and 100, those are two big numbers, and there are other ways to provide offense, but having that kind of thump and that kind of run production from both him and Salvador Perez, that's massive. If you want to look a little bit beneath the obvious, there's the core of your offense right there is those four. Look a little below the surface there. You want Jack Caglione to take a significant step forward. If he can be another run producer, another big bat, another home run threat, the way that we hope and think that he can be, that lengthens this lineup tremendously. And I think that's a big X factor is what will Jack Caglione provide offensively? I think there's every reason to have optimism that he will be a significant piece of the lineup. I also think it's important to note that when he came up last year, whether it was external or internal, there was probably some pressure that he felt to start getting the offense into high gear. The offense had really struggled when he had come up to the big leagues, and there was probably some pressure to, go be the guy. He doesn't have to be the guy. There are 4 or 5 other people that are the guy and ready to be the guy, and he can hit 6th, 7th, even 8th for the beginning of the season while he gets his feet under him. So that's an X factor. Can Carter Jensen sustain what he did in September? Every indication says, yeah, why not? I mean, there's a guy who's got outside and inside Rookie of the Year candidacy possibilities. And so he's someone to be really excited about too offensively. And then I'm really intrigued by what Isaac Collins brings to the table as a switch hitter. I'm intrigued by what Lane Thomas brings to the table in a potential bounce back year. I mean, here's a guy who was 2020 just a couple of years ago. I'm intrigued by what a bounce back season could look like for Jonathan India, who, dealt with some injuries last year and put his nose to the grindstone and showed up every single day, but was clearly not at 100%, especially in the second half of the season. I'm curious what a fully healthy Michael Massey season looks like and how he can be potentially a Swiss Army knife in the lineup and defensively. I'm curious, what Tyler Tolbert, what his year 2 looks like and what he can do on the base paths and everybody else too. I think that there are a lot of obvious things that have to go right, which is your stars have to be stars and you need to have the health. But I think under the surface there, it's can Jack Caglione take a meaningful step forward? Can the bullpen sustain success for 162? And I think that this is a Royals team, really, Jack, that has the ingredients to win the division and be a serious, serious postseason contender.
Well, you hear all off season long, it's this search for an impact bat. It's been that way the last couple of years, and they acquire Isaac Collins, who I really view as a high floor player, and you'll see that as derogatory, but I don't view it that way. If you have a high floor player, a league average bat with really good defense, that's great to have in your lineup, but what drives this outfield is going to be the production of Jack Caglione, and really, when you think about it, he's a 22, 23-year-old guy. He's barely gotten his feet wet at the big league level, and just because of what happened last year, it doesn't have to dictate what goes on in 2026. So for him to have success, what does need to happen? Is all going to be generated by his power? Does it have to be swing decision? Does he have to be more of a well-rounded player? Because as you said, he doesn't need to be the guy. He has to be a guy. So for a successful season from Jack in 2026, what does he need to do?
Well, first I'll start with what you said about Isaac Collins being a high floor kind of guy. And I would say that anyone that thinks that comment is anything other than positive, I think has a misunderstanding of what makes a good, consistent baseball team. You need to have a high floor. You want to have a high ceiling too, but if you're all high ceiling, there's going to be a ton of variance in the outcomes of games and seasons. Over the last couple of off seasons, one thing that I've loved that JJ Piccolo and his group have gone out and done is they have significantly raised the floor of this Royals team in terms of personnel that's on the bench, in terms of bullpen arms. I think we've seen that pretty steadily over the last couple of years, whether it's been with trades or free agent signings, that raising the floor, look, you've heard the phrase, a rising tide lifts all ships. You raise the floor, you are increasing your margin for error, and I also think inherently raising your ceiling. I think Jack is a really good example of a high ceiling player who hasn't quite established a floor yet. Part of that is because of his youth and inexperience. Part of that is because we hope that the floor is not what we saw last year, where he did struggle when he was in the big leagues. What's the key for him? Swing decisions is certainly part of it. Understanding that he's going to be pitched differently here than he was in the minors or even in college, and that, pitchers are really good, as he said, at throwing pitches that are strike to ball. And you've got to lay off those and force them to throw you the pitch that you want to hit. So that's obviously a key. I think the other key is also to understand that, it can be a slow burn. It might not all click simultaneously on opening day or on April 12th or on May 9th. It takes a little bit to get your feet under you, and it happens at different times for different players in different situations. But, remember, he was drafted a year ago, a year and a half ago. This is a meteoric rise that, yes, we're seeing more and more commonly now, and it's also hard to say, well, heck, Nick Kurtz was just the rookie of the year. He was taking 2 picks before you.
Yeah.
But that's an outlier. That's not the norm. And so I think it's important, and I think Jack understands this because he's got a great head on his shoulders. I think he understands that this is very much a learning process. And man, does he have some great people to learn from and lean on, whether it's Salvi or specifically Vinny as a fellow left-handed power hitter. It's been really cool to see the relationship that those two have specifically, both last year and now this year with Team Italy and the WBC. I say that Jack Caglione is an X factor because of the question mark of what the production is. But I do want to say that if Jack is not an all-star, it's not as if the Royals are going to struggle because of that. The Royals are going to be that much better because of Jack. But they also have pieces that are in place where if it does take Jack a little bit more time than he would like or anyone would like to, start hitting the ground running, this is an offense that can give him that leash. And I think that's really important to point out too.
Last one for you here, Jake. Really appreciate your time. Want to get you a broadcasting question here because you've had the pleasure the last couple of years of being with the voice of the Royals in Denny Matthews. How cool is that? Every time you enter Kauffman Stadium, every time you're getting into your play calling mode, you've got Denny right there, who just everybody listening to this understands, what an icon he is to the broadcasting industry, to Kansas City. But you're somebody that can sit right next to him. What's that like?
It's incredible, in short, and I think it's something that I have to sometimes consciously make sure that I don't take for granted. It's something that I am so lucky to get to do 81 times a year for home games, and occasionally, on the road when Denny comes to St. Louis or Chicago, and how we rotate radio and TV. But getting the chance to sit next to him is really special for a couple of reasons. For one, I think in general we take him for granted. He's an institution. He's been here since day one. And when you have something that's been a part of your existence and the fabric of your baseball experience for so long, there's a natural tendency to take that for granted. And I just think that we really can do a better job of recognizing how special he is and how special his career is. There are not many broadcasts in the country. There are not many teams that have an active Hall of Fame broadcaster as part of their team, let alone somebody that has been an active Hall of Fame broadcaster for the last 17 years. It's not as if he was inducted yesterday.
Exactly.
He was inducted in 2007. And so, we're going on year 58 for Denny of a career that has spanned literally since before the moon landing to today, since the year that they lowered the mound in baseball after the year of the pitcher to now the advent of the pitch clock and ABS, as we're going to see this year. What an incredible wealth of baseball experience that we get to have on air with us every day. And that's just on the baseball and on the broadcasting side. Like what he's able to do and how much baseball he's seen. I think one of the biggest things that have learned from him is the power of observation. And, we call him Noster Denny because he seems to know what's going to happen before it happens, and he is always right. And it's mind boggling, but there's a reason why he's always right. Part of it is because he's seen it time and time again, but part of it is because he is really consciously observing what is happening with the players on the field. Off the baseball side, I think one of the special parts about the game in general is the way that we share it with our family and friends. How we've grown up coming to games with our parents and our grandparents, our aunts and our uncles, our cousins, our brothers, our sisters, whomever. And on a human level, like, look, Denny and I have an age gap. I'll be 31 in a couple of weeks. Denny turned 83 last November. We have the widest age gap of any primary radio booth in baseball. I think that's what makes us really special. I get to sit next to somebody who is ostensibly like a grandfather to me, and I get to watch a baseball game with him. I mean, imagine going to a ball game with your grandpa and all the things that he'd have seen or players that he'd watched, icons that we think about, from the 50s and 60s, whether it's Stan Musial, across the state. That was someone that Denny got to see growing up, or Ted Williams or Mickey Mantle when he was coming up through Kansas City in the minor leagues before he went off to major league stardom. So to have that human aspect in our booth of, man, I get to watch a game with my grandpa. We get to share this generational experience together and then distill it for everybody that's listening. He's going to have all of his experience and perspectives from over 50 years of broadcasting baseball. I'm obviously going to come at things from a little bit of a different angle. I've got a laptop in front of me. Denny doesn't. I don't think that's a surprise. And so there are things that I can look up and things that I might talk about that Denny might not, and also vice versa. And I think that's what makes our broadcast incredibly unique. The fact that we have this multi-generational broadcast and can approach that from both a baseball perspective and also really embrace it from a human perspective. It's really special and something that I will be eternally grateful for the rest of my career.
Jake, phenomenal stuff. Thank you so much for joining us and looking forward to hearing you on the call.
All right. I appreciate it, Jack. Yeah, first game tomorrow, if you can believe it. We're ready to go.
Absolutely.